So I'm Nigel Sansom, Director of Research for Faculty of Medical Science, now wanting to do the second half-hour session, which is management of intellectual property, particularly focusing on a couple of things: licensing and valuation and partnership negotiations. But before we get into that, I just wanted to illustrate why technology transfer is such big business. And I'll mention the US a fair bit because some of the numbers are quite impressive, but the UK doesn't have numbers like this. So in 1 year, fairly recently I think, R&D, patenting and licensing activity was reported for 190 institutions with an R&D spend of $29.5 million, so that's like 10% of the total US R&D spend. Total invention disclosures of 13,000. Patent filings of 6,500, so half the disclosures led to patent filings. Total grants of 3,500, nearly 4,000. Over 4,000 new license and option agreements entered into, and a total of $1.26 billion in adjusted gross income received during the year from 9,000 plus license and option agreements. So you can see commercialization of university business can be, in some instances, real big business. That's the US. Our numbers are really, quite small. But of course, we're aspirational. We always want to kind of do what the Americans do in a albeit smaller way. In technology licensing, there are some issues. In business, valuation is about forecasting the future value of operating profits and cash flows. And, that's always a problem, particularly with spin-outs and startups. People want you 5-year cash flow forecast. It's typically, fictional stuff, because how do you forecast cash flows? You can have a go at it. You can try and put some sensible numbers in. Anybody who wants investment, obviously make sure that those numbers make the business look viable and good, but you really don't know. They are, best guesses often. The buyers paying to enjoy a stream of future positive cash inflows they couldn't otherwise experience. It's based on the innate belief that the past is a harbinger of the future. A history of sales, costs and profitability may give investors more faith in a positive future and increase likelihood of them investing. And due diligence focuses on two main issues: confirmation of the historic data and testing various hypotheses around why future should be worse, the same or better than the past. But that's in sort of general business. In technology licensing, technology innovation, particularly disruptive innovation, there is no past in the same sense that you find for other business types. So your track record is all ahead of you. So what about licensing agreements? A licensee is a contractual right giving somebody, a person or company, etc., permission to use certain IP that is owned by somebody else. So a university may have a bit of intellectual property, a patent or something like that it's then licensed to some other person or company. And it allows the licensor to make money from an idea by charging a user a fee or royalty, or both, to utilize the IP. It's not necessary to wait until the patent is fully granted. You've often seen things that have patent pending on them, and they're being marketed and sold and so on. But before you get into a license agreement, you need to have the thing I mentioned earlier, the non-disclosure agreement. So it's an exclusive or non-exclusive arrangement. In a license agreement, you have a definition of what it is. Can the company, and only the company that you license the thing to, exercise their right, or can you actually go and get other licensors to take it on in other respects or other territories? In a license agreement, we have the term, how long it's going to last for. Patents, as I mentioned earlier, they have a duration. They have 20 years, and we tend to think of duration of competitive advantage. So if somebody comes to you with an idea and wants you to pay some money for a license, your term is going to reflect ultimately, or may not, but it should reflect or have a reflection of how much competitive advantage there is in the thing. So if it comes off patent in 2 years' time, you're not going to spend a whole lot of money on it. unless it's something really amazing that you can really work with and make a ton of cash in that 2 years. It'll have in it rights to modify and combine it with other products. And sometimes you tend, if you do a license agreement with somebody, you can get stiffed because the company you license the thing to combine it with something else, and they say, oh, we're selling this as another thing, so we don't have to pay you a license fee anymore. So you have to be very careful about getting your license agreement right, that you know exactly what rights are in there to modify or combine. Rights to transfer and sub-license are in there. Termination, so in what grounds, what situations, what grounds would you have for terminating the license? If they take the license out but don't use it or don't do anything with it at all, it's just sitting there, you might want to have a deed of reassignment in your license agreement so you can get it back. Sometimes big companies do that. They see you've got a really interesting technology which will be a major competitor for them, but it costs them a lot of money to develop it. So they pay the upfront and the license fee. They don't really pay any royalties because they don't develop it commercially. It just sits in their back drawer, and they don't exercise their rights to it. So you need to ensure that you can get it back if you want to. Indemnity for infringement, geographical area covered. So the license may go to a company to develop the thing in America, but you can license to somebody else to develop it in China. And any non-disclosure or confidential information is held there also. Valuation. I said I'd touch on valuation. And there are two sides of the coin. If you're thinking of getting into a licensing agreement, you need to know what you're selling. So the technology, the rights, the patents, the proprietary technology, information, the people, the hardware, the software, the customers, who are they, suppliers, external contracts, external licenses, and so on. Then all the stuff about patent management, enforcement, infringement, defense, and how am I being paid? So that the lump sum, the royalties, the upfront payments you might want to get, the milestone payments, the option payments. I'll come on to options later on. Royalty adjustments, IP rights, purchase commitments, equity. Are you getting equity? And then in terms of being paid, you may be getting paid by somebody else taking on all that stuff to do with the IP. The prosecution of the patent, the enforcement and defense of the patent. So the coin toss. Suppose somebody comes to you and says to you, okay, I'll give you a lot of money if you can get successive heads on a coin toss. If you get a tail, I'm going to give you no money. If you get one head, it's $1 million. If your next throw is two heads, it's a head also, then you get 10 million. If the next throw after that is a head, you get $100 million. So how would a rational buyer look at that opportunity? So the optimist will say, yep, that's a $100 million opportunity right there with high risk. A pessimist would say there's a 50-50 chance that this opportunity has no value at all. Probability theory and decision tree analysis are tools that we tend to use in valuation. And you can put some actual numbers on this. So you could say, I'm buying 20 coin tosses in a row. I can value with probability analysis and decision tree analysis the value of the opportunity. And I think the maths comes to something like $14 million. You pay for the opportunity potentially in 20s to get 3 successive heads and make $100 million. Yeah, I'm not going to do the math right now, but I understand that's kind of where it is. So in a negotiation, you may say, I'll pay you $11 million, and the person might say, okay. Valuation methods I want to talk about. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on these. Industry standards, rating and ranking are very similar. Discounted cash flow analyses, Monte Carlo simulation, real options, and auction. So industry standards, in different areas you tend to get different royalty rates typically. So in materials and processes, a royalty rate of 1 to 4. This is royalty of a percentage of net profit. So it's not a percentage of sale price. That's a different thing. The net profit is the real number. So you can't expect to negotiate on the sale price because there's a whole lot of other stuff that that sale price pays for all the overheads and marketing and costs and so on. So your royalty typically is small. Medical equipment devices, 3 to 5%. Software, 5 to 15%, depends. Semiconductors are small, but of course, if you've got a semiconductor novel and you're going to get it into Asus or some company like that, you might be finding your hardware in many millions of units. So your 2% would be a real attractive deal. Pharma varies, depends on whether we're talking about composition of materials or to do with new clinical testing on new entities. Diagnostics also 4 to 5 or 2 to 4 dependent. And biotech, usually small numbers, but again, they're multi-billion pound opportunities when you have a developed compound. And you can understand why a royalty rate might be so low in biotech and pharma, for that matter, because they get a monoclonal antibody that's a therapeutic from a real early stage to a sort of proof of concept stage. You need a really big check to be written at some point, where there's a go, no-go point. It might be $30 million or $100 million or whatever it is. They're big numbers. So you come along as a university with an idea around in that space, you won't get a lot for it in terms of royalty downstream. But if it makes it, later on after preclinical testing and launch and so on, then your actual money in the bank could be potentially really significant. Rules of thumb refer to a useful guideline for decision making based on numerous experiences. So students spend 2 hours studying outside of class for every hour in class. A house typically rents for about 1% of its value per month. So these are kind of finger in the air. That sounds about right. And deal equity can be determined by a rule of thumb, but there are 4 elements to consider: total value, so gain arising through cost savings and new profits; apportionment, so how do you split out the gains; investment and risk, so whoever does most gets most generally, whoever risks most gets most. If 2 parties enter into 50-50 splits, it would be expected that they would split 50-50 all the investment, risk exposure and day-to-day work involved in making the business successful. But as you could probably imagine, when you're a university academic and you've got a bit of IP that you're going to license, it's unlikely that you'll get involved in all of those things. So you can usually guarantee that your split is going to be very different, usually in the sort of 25-75. As a general rule of thumb then, a royalty rate of 25% of net profits is used in licensing negotiations. It's usually a starting point. It's situation specific, but it's often where people kick off, particularly when they're using this rule of thumb. The table is complicated. We're going to put these on the website, so have a look at this. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but you can see your starting point on the left, the different buyers and sellers' perspective, and you can kind of price in there. You can see where the rooms for negotiation is, and you can kind of understand from that, look at that and say, well, what am I not going to go beyond or below or above if you're a buyer. Discounted cash flow. Anybody come across discounted cash flows before, or net present value? I'm sure some of you have. So it's a means to create a present calculation of all of the future cash flows from earnings, net of expenses. And you often hear this term net present value. If one lends an entity A dollars, let's say $1,000, and expects a K rate of return, you'd expect $1,070 back after 1 year if your K is 7%. Over N years, you use the formula, so A is the amount of dollars that you're lending, equals the value of money in a year over, it's in any 1 year, over 1 plus the hurdle rate. This is the rate at which we identify we're going to put in there to effectively adjust for risk, all made to the power of the number of years involved. So if you had 5 years after the £1,000 is lent, we'd expect the DCF, discounted cash flow or net present value, to be equal to £712.99p. So you're minusing off your initial investment. As perceived risk increases, the risk-adjusted hurdle rate is increased. You effectively, if you're making a decision on investment, you want that number to be positive. If you're negative net present value, then you usually make a decision not to invest. And the risk-adjusted hurdle rate on the left goes up with risk. So you've got T-bills, T-bonds on the left there, junk bonds and so on. They have well-characterized risk, and their risk-adjusted hurdle rate is low. You've got many companies that are big. They utilize their weighted average cost of capital, so strategic finance term that we're not going to get into today. That's what that is in the middle. I just mentioned it for clarity. But the various things that we come across here, from new features in a product to a new product, through a new product and a new technology and a new business up to a startup, have various increases in risk-adjusted hurdle rate. So when you're doing your discounted cash flow, to have a larger number in there gives you a lower net present value. So your likelihood of getting an investment can diminish. Monte Carlo simulation is something that I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on. It's software. We have Crystal Ball and At Risk from various companies that look at taking the outputs of net present value or discounted cash flow and changing some of the variables slightly and modelling, a range. So you get a normal distribution, and this is used widely to get to a more it's supposedly a more accurate. They enable replacement of single value best guesses with a prescribed randomness that characterises not only what is believed to be the most likely outcome, but also includes treatment of reasonably probable but less likely outcomes. Real options, NPV, when the number of years is really large, isn't really a good method. And some organisations like real options. Some pharma companies, Merck, Sharp and Dohme, like real options. Others don't, because I think it's too math orientated. I think it's a good one. It can be a bit of overkill. Sometimes rule of thumb is just fine. Pick a number, go into a negotiation situation with that number and go for it. This one includes a lot more mathematics, and it's based on something called the Black-Scholes formula that they use in option financing. So the guys in the city use this Black-Scholes thing to price up European call options. In real options, we effectively map NPV, modified NPV, and bring the idea of cumulative volatility into the equation to effectively give us the price of an option. So you're not saying I'll invest this much money to buy a license. You're actually saying my information from my mathematics enables me to price what I think is a option that I'll pay a little bit of money now. This is the amount of money I'm going to pay, and this is why. I've got the math to back it up. And when we get more information downstream, some more certainty of the thing, then we'll talk about having a proper full-on licensing agreement, and I'll pay you the upfront and the royalties and so on. It's an opportunity to spend a little and learn a little. Negotiation with potential partners. Let's get real or not play. This is where we get into a situation across the table with other companies that want or show an interest in your stuff. Why partner? Partners bring what you can't to the deal. Technology, distribution, customers, brand, IP, potentially, other IP, manufacturing, and global scale. So if you've developed a new pharmaceutical, for example, you're unlikely as a university person to be able to develop that thing because you don't have the means to, the production, the scale, the marketing, all that goes with it to make the thing proper, and preclinical safety, and all these things are important and costly. So your partners are important, and partnering is important. In the pre-negotiation phase then, if we get to that point, technology assessments, market assessments, due diligence, stakeholder analysis. So who in the organization, who are the inventors, who are the legal people involved, department people involved, licensee, who are the co-owners, funding agencies, And all of these, these are important things to consider. Has there been a thorough needs and wants analysis done? Valuation, we talked about valuation a little bit earlier on, and what else out there is comparable. But importantly, if you're going to go into a negotiation, what's your best alternative to a negotiated alternative? This is the thing, when the negotiation doesn't go as well as you hoped it might, and you're going to have a walk-away position, you need to know, when am I going to walk away? I'm not going to keep on going down and down and down. There comes a point where I'm going to say, actually, no, I've now reached the point where I'm going to walk away from the table. And, there's an opportunity to, I guess, to convert some of the more promising ideas into tangible alternatives at that point. It's not usually the end of the process. In the negotiation phase, know your negotiation goals, determine the participants' positions versus interests, anticipate what their banter might be, create options, update key stakeholders. That's important. I'll tell you why in a minute. And commitment to the deal. So you're going to do it. You're going to really go for it. At the negotiation, know who is attending. What is the scope of the IP being licensed? Are lawyers present or not present? Clarify authority. So do you actually have the authority to make a decision? If the other side has got you to a point where you're ready to sign, can you? Is your legal team going to come down you like a ton of bricks at that point? Ensuring good note-taking and summarising what's been said is really important. And know that you don't have to do a deal. Afterwards, update internal stakeholders immediately and get them on board. Facilitate legal review and execution. Ensure compliance with the terms. And hopefully, if it's all gone right, then you can develop those relationships. There's a lot of dirty little tricks that companies might play on you. And I'm not going to go through all of these. There are far too many. I'll just go through a few. So you come across this. You're in a negotiating situation. You've got a company across the table. You get righteous indignation, that is absolutely ridiculous, what you're asking for. Nobody in their right mind would agree to that. Often followed by a string of expletives. It's understandable. It's emotional. It's intended to adjust the aspiration level of the other side. It's commonplace. You should be prepared for this. And you hear it all the time. I'm going to rattle through some of these. You get good cop, bad cop. Again, it's designed to lower the aspiration level of the negotiator. One person is constantly confrontational, stubborn, and demanding. The other is understanding, supportive, and friendly. Good cop is equal to or subordinate to bad cop. And the fallacy is that the good cop is trying to help you satisfy the bad cop. You've all seen this in some form or other, I'm sure. The counter for good cop, bad cop is ignore bad cop and deal only with good cop. If they're in the same room, this is. If the good cop wants to remain good cop, he will have to address your position on issues. Or, in case two, a good cop approaches after bad cop leaves. Good cop will ask for a concession in order to appease bad cop. Make no concessions to good cop. Insist on negotiating with bad cop. He will have to soften his posture if any deal is to get done. Then we come to the hi-hat. So this is when somebody comes, after the negotiation, somebody comes to your boss and makes some kind of comment about you, about your inexperience and why they're struggling with the deal. It's very, very, very common. With a stomp down, they basically say, you're totally incompetent, stupid, hostile, arrogant, all these sort of things happen. And they demand that you're taken off of the negotiation. Be aware of the relationship between your boss and the opponent, if any. And that's kind of the way, keeping stakeholders involved. And I said about in an earlier slide, keep stakeholders involved immediately, all the time, about all that you're going through. And you should be able to get around that. I mean, you can request a meeting with their boss, or you get your boss to talk to their boss. My boss is a bastard. Get that? Not my boss, no. You understand? Be careful. He's lovely, actually. The negotiators agreed to accept a term you wanted, but later laments that his or her boss wouldn't go for it. he apologises for the boss and complains that he's a tough taskmaster or she's a tough taskmaster. And usually they haven't talked to anybody at all. You've probably seen this. If you ever bought a used car in the UK, or you're going to negotiate selling your car as a part exchange, they do this all the time. They go next door, I'll just talk to my boss, and then they'll probably go and talk about the football or something, and then they come back and say, oh, the boss is a bastard, he wouldn't let me do the deal, we're going to have to change all the terms, yeah? My boss is a lunatic. It's a variation of the last one, basically. They just say, he's nuts. So, counter that, request a meeting with the boss to discuss. You can do that. Immediately indicate your boss has also indicated points that will need to be changed, and that opens up renegotiation. Provide a counter proposal with substantially better terms for you elsewhere, and they may change their mind and jump at the original offer. I'm not authorized is another common one, so you need to get to the person who is authorized. So they're not really dirty tricks; they're just common processes that people go through and do, all the time. But it's good to know about them. There are a lot more, so we can put those, if you wish, on the website as well, and have a comprehensive list of the sort of things. If you ever get into the situation with us, the sort of things that we come across. It's an inherently human and emotional process. It's desperation. That's what it is, basically. And these are things people learn during childhood. But if you're in the situation, you need to keep calm. Don't let emotions get in the way, and have a best alternative to negotiated agreement, and you're on your way.